Bezzalo & Co., a six-figure jewelry business. I was able to scale my business to six figures quickly because I introduced laser cutting into my process. Today's video is going to be all about laser cutters, how you can use them, and how to know which laser cutter is right for you. Before we jump into the laser cutters, I want to show you, if you have no background in laser cutter, think of this as a Cricut with a laser beam. So you can cut much more deeply than, for example, a Cricut would be able to cut. And you can also work generally more quickly than a Cricut. You can cut on some laser cutters up to 1/4 inch wood with some limitations. This is a cute little earring rack. One thing that I love about laser cutting is that you can take a design and turn it into a product. These are so cute. So those are earrings that I laser cut with hangers that I laser cut on an earring rack that I laser cut. You can also make signs. Here's a sign that I made using my laser cutter. I think it is so cute. I do not know where the base is, so I'm just showing it to you like this. But this is to give you an idea of what kinds of things you can do with a laser cutter. When considering what kind of laser cutter to buy, there are two main kinds of laser cutters. There are diode laser cutters and CO2 laser cutters. This is a diode cutter, and this is not a sponsored video. I did actually get this laser cutter as a gift, but it just happens to be sitting on my desk, okay? So they're getting some free promotion here, but this is kind of a stand-in for a diode laser. I'm not essentially recommending render. I just got this and I haven't really cut much with it, so I can't quite vouch for it, but it is an example of a diode laser. These are generally cheaper, weaker, and more portable. So there are some pros here, and that is that it is more accessible to the average person to buy one. You can move these around more easier if you have a limitation in space. You can just kind of pack these up. This one in particular folds into a tiny little rectangle, but they are more portable. The CO2 laser is different than a diode laser in that it is going to have more power, going to be able to cut through more materials, but it's going to cost more money. So that is something to consider when you are starting out. CO2 is going to be more expensive, take up more space, but also it's going to be more powerful. So depending on what you're trying to do, if you are just testing out a theory and you just want to see, like, can I make a product people want to buy, you can definitely buy a diode. Their diodes that start at like $200 on Amazon. I haven't personally tested any, so I cannot vouch for them, and this is the first diode that I actually try to use. So I'm just learning about diode laser cutters. They are going to have limitations in terms of what they can cut. You're not going to get that much power out of it. Usually a diode laser is 1 watt to up to 20 watts. So that is significantly weaker than usually a CO2 laser that starts at 50 watts and goes up to 150 watts. You would definitely be able to cut something like this cardstock, a thin piece of wood, leather, but you are not going to be able to easily cut thicker wood and even some acrylics. It cannot handle clear acrylic, iridescent acrylic, mirror acrylic, and blue acrylic just because of something with the light waves. So you won't be able to cut some materials at all. This is why it's really important to ask yourself, what am I trying to use this laser cutter for? Because that is going to determine what you should buy. But before you go off and buy any laser cutter, my #1 recommendation for you would be that before you buy a laser cutter, you try one. There are actually places called maker spaces. I'm not sure if you've heard of these, but these are in libraries. They're becoming more common, but they're essentially a place that's communally owned. Sometimes you have to pay a membership. If it's in a library, it could be free. Just Google makerspace near me. I will do a whole separate video on makerspaces later, but this is where I started. I had to pay maybe $60 a month. There were some cons, and eventually I outgrew the space, but to start, I'm so thankful I did that. I'm so glad I didn't sink $6,000 into a Glowforge, which was what I would have done at that point. And then been like, oh my gosh, I have to make back this money, and then also I have to move this expensive thing because we moved that year, and learn how to use their spaces. Will give you access to a lot of people who can help you early on, where you can troubleshoot and get ideas from people and get help. Those are maker spaces, but if you're looking and you're like, I'm ready to buy a laser cutter, what is your best recommendation? There are 3 laser cutters that I would recommend, 2 which I have tried and 1 which I have not, but which I hear and see good things from. So if you really wanted to start on the lower end and you wanted to go out today and get a laser cutter, I would recommend going to Michael's and buying the Glowforge Aura, or whatever their cheapest one is called. This machine is so straightforward. I've cut at Glowforges and makerspaces after starting with more like industrial laser cutters, and it makes a huge difference. If you are not a techie person, if you don't have an engineer friend or someone who's willing to troubleshoot things and figure stuff out, or if you yourself are not that person, which, like, I am barely that person, you should maybe get something with a very easy software like a Glowforge. There are trade-offs like cost, but with a little like cheaper one, it's pretty easy to get started. You can cut that. They also make their own materials which have like a little sticker on them. I wish I had an example. So when you put it in there, the camera reads the little barcode and it gives you the exact cut settings. Now, these are not fail-proof. I've definitely ruined a whole sheet or two because it didn't register the right laser settings. But in theory, this is very helpful to just kind of like plug in and go. So that would be my recommendation for someone who's just starting out and who's not super techy and doesn't want to spend more than $1,000. Next category, if you want to spend more than $1,000, but you're not ready to do like 2.4, 2.5, which is my next recommendation, you could maybe get something like an Xtool. Again, this machine is pretty easy to use. It's still a diode, but it comes with more bells and whistles. And I think the software is more intuitive than Lightburn, which is what most laser cutters and my third recommendation would actually use. So my final recommendation would be the OMTech. That is what I have. I have an affiliate code for you, which you should use if you want, but you definitely do not have to. It does get you like an extra $100 to $150 off, depending on the sale that they're currently running. It's 3.2K, but honestly, I've seen it on sale for as low as 2.5 recently for Mother's Day, Memorial's Day, etc. So you can definitely snag it for a good price. It is 50 watts, which means it can cut through 3 millimeters to 1/4 inch pretty easily. It can cut through most materials. Its biggest limitation is its laser bed. Most laser cutters in this kind of category of the 50 watt 3 to 6K are going to be 12 by 18, this size. If you're hoping to make huge signs, obviously this is not going to be enough space for you. Some of them do have a pass through where the material can pass this way, which gives you room for a much longer size, but I've never tried it or used it, and I think, if you're going to do that a lot, you have to be able to move it around and stuff. Maybe it would be worth it. You're going to need to vent it, so you need to have a window. You do not need a water chiller for the OMTech, which is nice. It has a camera, but I don't use it, and it's not as good as something like on the Glowforge. It does require some amount of tech. It's not like as techy as something else. There are some other laser cutters from other companies that are lower cost, but they will require a lot more troubleshooting for you to figure stuff out. So the OMTech is good because I think it's still somewhat accessible. They have a really good Facebook group where you can go and ask questions. That's where I get out of pickles whenever I'm stuck. To this day, I currently have a problem that I'm trying to solve. So I think the biggest drawback in the OMTech too is that sometimes it has this ring that you turn on to start a job. It kind of looks cool, like the Glowforge ring, but it's less functional in that when something is wrong, it turns red to tell you something is wrong, but then there's nowhere to see what's wrong. There's one hack that people do where they install a Rita controller to kind of troubleshoot the error messages. Honestly, I just turned it on and off in all those situations and been fine. So it hasn't been a deal breaker for me. I still think for 2.5K, it is the best value on the market, the best size, the best quality, and the best laser size bed. But you will have to learn quite a bit before you use it, so that's something to consider. So overall, these are my recommendations for laser cutters and the main differences between a CO2 laser and a diode laser. Let me know if you have any questions for me about laser cutters in general or a particular model, and I will do my best to answer them. Again, I am no expert and I'm brand new to diode, so I'm just learning what that's like, but I could see how this would be great if you're just starting out and you don't want to invest a ton of money, but you also want to have a machine to kind of start trying to laser cut things. I hope this was helpful, this broad overview of diode versus CO2 and knowing what laser cutter is right for you. And I will see you here soon.